I think most of us can probably agree that video games are kinda cool, and even though there's a ton of pessimism and exhaustion and fatigue among a lot of the gaming community these days, we still love it and we wouldn't trade it for anything. Besides, love and friendship. Forget that, there's a new Mario Golf. That being said, I think it's been a very long time since a game honestly truly blew my mind, whether that be with the gameplay or the graphics or writing and story, and I think that comes chiefly down to two factors. The first being that graphics technology is getting closer and closer to realism, but the jumps we've made from the Atari days have been getting smaller and smaller, and the disparities between generations are becoming more and more marginal as we reach the upper limit of what realism actually looks and sounds like.
Graphics on PlayStation 5. Oh my god, it's exactly the same.
Like, there was a time when this was realistic graphics, so, it was only up from there. The last time a game's graphics blew my mind were Last of Us 2 and Red Dead 2. I guess Cyberpunk's graphics were pretty neat until the foliage started displaying over top of everything and would never stop even after I updated it and verified the game files a billion times, so it kinda ruined everything. But the other factor keeping games from blowing my mind now is just that I'm old, so it's very difficult to impress me. To blow me away now, you need to make Mario real and have him give me a pizza to my house like IRL. If you can't make good on that, then you need to sit your ass down and stop making video games. Nintendo is now out of business, and it was thanks to me. You're welcome. Thinking back to the innocence of my youth though, I'm actually surprised how many games truly did blow my mind. I was born just after the beginning of the wild 3D era, which for a lot of people was the big thing. After the inception of legitimate 3D games, there was no turning back. But by the time I gained sentience, these games were already just the new normal. Mario 64 was fun, but I didn't think of it as a leap in technology so much as just the baseline of what a video game is. It was one of the first games I had ever played in my life, so I really had nothing to compare it to, so it wasn't until years later that I came to fully understand and appreciate its legacy. But in the interim, there were a number of games that just floored me with how futuristic and forward-looking they were at the time. So just for shits and giggles, we're gonna do a little retrospective here about the games that blew my fucking mind, and for legal reasons, I have to warn you that this video does contain some spoilers for games, so just be cautious if you don't want to get spoiled. I spoiled the ending of Witcher 3 in my Games That Are Too Long video in great detail, and I'm still sorry about that, so I'm gonna try and remember not to spoil anything else for y'all without warning. Alright, watch me blow your mind with video games. When I first started playing video games, my family only had one console. You know it, you love it, it's the Nintendo 64, and it's a mighty fine piece of work. It could render like 7 polygons at a time, and if you were lucky, you could have 200 lines of highly compressed voice acting. And I played a lot of games on it, chiefly the top tier ones that everyone remembers, but none of them really blew me away until I played Banjo-Tooie. Compared to all the Mario and Zelda stuff we had, these graphics were crazy. You had these super rich detailed textures and massive worlds, and they were all interconnected, and that was insane to me. It felt less like a video game and more like a real adventure through a cohesive universe. That was nuts, and also very unique, like even games today often don't have that level of interconnectivity. Then one day, it happened. I went downstairs one Saturday morning to play my N64 like I always do, and there's my dad holding this weirdo controller with only 2 handles instead of 3, and these completely unfamiliar sounds were coming from the TV, and I ask him, "What the hell is this?" And he's like, "It's new, Nintendo." So as usual, he didn't answer my fucking question because parents are assholes. It's the Gamecube, by the way. We're talking about the Gamecube. I feel like the leap from the 5th generation to the 6th was insane because in the 5th generation, the 3D thing was still new and they were trying to figure out how it worked, but by the 6th generation, a lot of it had been figured out, and the technology was finally sufficient enough for making games look good and run well. So I caught a glimpse of the new Nintendo game my dad was playing and my heart just stopped on a dime. I saw hundreds of tiny 3D characters running around on the screen, all doing their own thing. They all had super rounded character models that didn't look like Toblerone bars came to life. That's right, it's motherfucking Pikmin, boy. Banjo-Tooie looked great, but this was something else. This was beyond groundbreaking. Photorealistic environments, hundreds of 3D character models running around, screen resolution that was higher than 240i, and frame rate that was actually good. It was probably the first game I had seen where the frame rate didn't dip anytime it had to render something slightly intensive. And it did it while being the most graphically phenomenal game I had ever seen at that point. Pikmin was real life. It looked like it could have taken place in my backyard, and that was the whole point. And best of all, the game itself is very well made. This is one of those games I can never stop coming back to. The Pikmin trilogy is easily one of my favorite game series of all time, and it all started as a tech demo to show off how fucking rad the Gamecube was. If only they listened. But there was another launch title as well. The original Luigi's Mansion is one of the most atmospheric games I have ever played in my life, even now. Even next to the bleeding edge graphics of today, Luigi's Mansion is such a polished game from the standpoint of presentation. Visually, the game was phenomenal. You had this crazy lighting and particle effects, Luigi's nose had jiggle physics, and every time you opened a new door, you'd get this little cutscene where an extremely detailed Luigi hand would turn a super rounded, shiny doorknob. That was crazy. I had no idea you could put doorknobs in a video game. You had these cloth physics that were just insane. Remember when Last of Us 2 came out and people were going crazy over the shirt graphics? Yeah, this was like that. I could not believe what I was seeing, and the atmosphere is honestly way more intense than the sequels it got, which went for a more cartoonish outlook, which objectively isn't a bad thing, but the original game made me feel genuinely immersed, and sometimes even afraid. No joke, this game is actually really creepy sometimes, like the final boss where you fucking blow Bowser's head off and he puts it on backwards and shit. That was scary. The gameplay isn't anything particularly special, it's mostly just Luigi humping things and vacuuming up the money from them, but the strength is in the world they created. It's incredible. Every single room of this mansion has been permanently cemented into my brain hole. Then we got Mario Sunshine. Now gameplay wise, this was like an evolution of Mario 64 in some respects, which I liked a lot, but what really blew me away was the water graphics. This was the first game I can remember playing where the water actually looked like real water, and even today it still looks very nice, although I must admit to some bias here, I drink water almost daily, so I guess you could say I'm a big fan. But it was also so impressive because of the camera control. The C-stick gives you so much fluid and precise control over where the camera angle goes. It's the first time I can remember a 3D platformer giving you this much control over the camera. Thousand Year Door. This wasn't technologically mind-blowing or anything, but I consider it mind-blowing in that it's such a bold and unique title from a much less sanitized and risk-averse era of Mario. You had Waluigi pointing at his dick, and you had Mario going to the fucking mob. It's got really polished gameplay and a pretty tight story, completely new and original characters, and a thoughtfully fleshed out world. It's easily one of the greatest games Nintendo has ever signed off on. And I just wish that the Nintendo Zoomers of today had a legal way of playing it without selling their fucking grandma out, but whatever you say, Nintendo, just do your thing, bestie. I ain't care. Bowser stole the paint? Pfft, sure, brother, totally. Just do what you want, man. Like, if that's what you want, then do what you want. While I was stuck playing Nintendo games, there was so much else going on with the other platforms. The big thing was online play with Xbox Live and the PS2 network adapter. That was gonna be the future of video games. The Gamecube did technically have online and LAN capabilities, but it needed a hardware add-on that nobody owned, and there were like 6 or 7 games that supported it. I didn't even know it was a thing until it wasn't a thing anymore, but you know what I did know about? Nintendo Wi-Fi, baby. My older brother got an original dummy thick Nintendo DS. For me, this thing was like alien technology. Up until that point, I'd seen what the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance could do, and 95% of it was 2D sprite-based graphics, which wasn't bad, but I figured it was basically impossible to do 3D graphics on a handheld. That is, until I saw my brother playing Metroid Prime Hunters. Not only did they put 3D graphics on a handheld, but it actually looked pretty goddamn good. The idea of playing Mario 64 on the go was basically witchcraft to me. I thought this shouldn't be possible, but it totally was, and that's when I said, Alright, I gotta get my own DS now, so I got one for Christmas, the DS Lite. I still have it. The hinge is busted because of course it is. The game I got with it was New Super Mario Bros, which is tight as shit. I think I definitely prefer this one over the later ones. This was when the word new actually meant something. New power-ups, new stages and music, new graphics and worlds. But what was really insane about New SMB was the 2-player. Back in the Game Boy days, if you were playing a multiplayer game, every single player needed their own copy of the game and you needed to physically wire them up with a cable. I don't remember anybody playing multiplayer games on the Game Boy. I know they used the link cable to trade Pokemon, but that was about it. But what was crazy about the DS is that for a lot of games, you only needed one copy of the game to play multiplayer because everyone else would connect wirelessly to the person with the game, the host if you will, and download a mini version of the game from the host directly to the console and do multiplayer like that. It was super convenient and it didn't nickel and dime your friends and family having to buy a whole $40 game per person.
Yo, check this out. I'm gonna shit on this guy. Fucking got him.
And who could forget Mario Kart DS? 8-player portable Mario Kart with no hassle. That was crazy, and it also introduced the Nintendo Wi-Fi service, so you could play games with complete strangers on the internet just like the other boys were doing. The DS also had this little thing called PictoChat where you could send short text to other people with some simple drawings attached. I remember I texted the word fuck to my little brother and he snitched to our parents. Yeah, that was actually considered a serious offense in our household. Although it was wireless, which was pretty cool and neat, it didn't work over Wi-Fi to my memory, so you basically could only send messages across a moderate distance of 30 feet or so. It sounds antiquated as fuck now, but you gotta remember, this was the early 2000s. This was right before every single person had a smartphone, because they didn't really exist in the capacity that they do now, and they wouldn't for another few years. Actually, there's a really funny interview with Miyamoto where he was asked about developing Super Mario Run for the iPhone touchscreens, and he humbly brags about how Nintendo was working with touchscreens years before the iPhone even existed.
Nintendo actually released a device that used touch as an input mechanism before the iPhone even released.
Well played.
Oh, right, the touchscreen. Well, it definitely had one. I can't say I cared way too much for that part of it. Much like the Wii, I felt that it often ended up feeling like a vehicle for lame gimmicks. What was really shitty is when they tried to use it as a substitute for real analog controls, like with Rayman DS and Mario 64 DS. Like, do you really want to play a 3D platformer with a touchscreen? That being said, it did have a pretty lit port of Plants vs. Zombies. Speaking of the Wii. From basically every perspective, this thing was honestly pretty much the opposite of mind-blowing to me. From the beginning, it felt like a children's toy, and I was 8 years old, so I was basically an adult. What really sold me on it was the Virtual Console. I heard the Wii could play games from all previous Nintendo systems. I assumed that meant it was some clusterfuck monstrosity with a billion different cartridge slots and controller ports, but actually it was a cute little box, and instead of being physical, the Virtual Console was entirely virtual. Before the Wii came out, all our N64 stuff disappeared. Now I know it was our mom who gave them away thinking we wouldn't care because we had a Gamecube, but at the time we had no clue. So this Virtual Console was a godsend. Being able to play Star Fox 64 and Ocarina of Time again in glorious 480p was so beautiful I almost cried. And we could play it with a Gamecube controller as well. That was very convenient because we already had a bunch of those, but everything else about the Wii was pretty underwhelming. The graphics, with a couple exceptions, were generally not that much better than the GameCube, and a lot of the games were kinda dog-ass in my opinion, and around this time a new thing was blowing up. Social media, also known as, uh-oh, we're gonna destroy society because human brains aren't evolved enough to handle the internet. And that's why MGS2 blew my mind. When I started watching YouTube videos, it kinda brought me to an entirely new world and exposed me to a billion new perspectives. The coolest thing is that I could finally see actual footage of other games being played. Before then, I'd only ever heard things from the shitty kids I knew at school and occasionally saw some screenshots in magazines, but to see the actual footage of the games being played was something else. And it was another world entirely, and it blew my baby Nintendo brain out my ass. You see Roman here? I thought he was a real person. After a while though, being able to watch gaming videos on YouTube had the opposite effect of blowing my mind. The reason being that now I had access to all this knowledge of super powerful futuristic games that my parents would never let me play because everyone knows violent video games cause violent behavior. But there was one thing you couldn't get across over YouTube: 3D. The Nintendo 3DS was something I just had to get on launch date, and I did. I bought it with the 17th port of Rayman 2, and I could not believe how well the 3D worked, by which I mean it was still really dumb and gimmicky, but at least it wasn't in red and black and didn't need glasses. The 3D blew my mind for like a week, and then it was just a take it or leave it thing. What was cool about the 3DS though was game demos. This was actually the first place I got to play a Metal Gear game. They had a demo of the Virtuous Mission intro from MGS3, which was really fucking cool. And this actually made me buy the PS2 version secondhand shortly after I bought a secondhand PS2 off of someone I knew in school. Wasn't exactly a friend, in fact he was kind of a bit of a dick, and I still don't know how much of it was a bit, but at least his PS2 worked okay. Before MGS3, I had played games with great stories and presentation, but this was the first time I can remember where it was good enough to be mind-blowing. The disproportionate amount of cutscenes took some getting used to, but I started to really like it as it set up all these dominoes and built all this anticipation for them to inevitably knock them over. It took me a long time to learn to appreciate the stealth gameplay. I was not good at it at first. I remember one time in particular where I got so extremely angry at the game that I decided fuck it and started murdering people indiscriminately like this video here. I was so pissed off at these 3D models for spotting me all those times, and I was so happy to blow them to pieces. That is, until a particular boss fight in the game. If you're unfamiliar with MGS3, consider this a massive spoiler, but there's a boss fight with a character called the Sorrow. This is completely different from any other boss in the game. The fight has Snake walking down this endless dead river with this haunting music playing in the background while these ghostly figures all shamble towards you and try to suck your soul out. And after walking for like a couple minutes, I realized that these were the souls of all the people that I fucking gunned down with absolute glee because I sucked at the game. Every last character you kill, the game remembers it for this one mindfuck boss fight. I played violent video games on the down low before, but never once did I feel bad for killing people in those games until I played MGS3. And I felt fucking horrible because I remember how happy I felt when I shot those poor bastards in the first place. I didn't know they were gonna do that. It made me feel selfish and undisciplined, like making it this far in the game was a hollow victory that I took by force at the expense of people who were really just doing their jobs. Discussing death and violence in a serious and consequential way is something that I feel a lot of games try to do, but it's extremely rare that they manage to reach the level of Metal Gear. MGS3 made me grow up. I realized just how small I was and how terrible the world is and just how unfair life can be, and I legitimately cried during the credits, and I don't think a video game ever did that to me before. And that game is 17 years old now, and still, very few games can even touch it in either respects of story or gameplay. Every MGS game blew my mind in one way or another, but the other one that sticks out is MGS5, which is totally different from the rest of them. I went into it expecting the story to blow my mind, and it ended up doing the opposite, but the gameplay is so open-ended and polished. Like you can win a sniper duel by calling in a supply drop to drop boxes on her head. It doesn't even matter which supplies they are, as long as the box falls on her head, you win. And that's just one example. People go fucking nuts on this game because of how many toys you have, and the nuances in using them. MGS5 is the last game I can remember being super hyped for. Don't get me wrong, I've seen and played games that are really cool since then, but this was the last time I can remember losing my shit over a game. But there was one more game that blew my mind, but in a much more subtle way, and that was The Last of Us. From a gameplay perspective, this game isn't that much fun, like at all. It's mostly engaging because of how it's contextualized, but the story and writing is incredibly polished. Every single scene and every single character matters and adds something to the game. Everything feels necessary, nothing feels taken for granted. I don't know if it's my favorite video game story of all time, but it's definitely one of the most highly refined and well thought out pieces of media I have ever seen, especially among video games. It's so cohesive and complete, and it carefully earns every moment, and it ends on such a shocking and climactic open-ended note that makes you go, holy fucking shit, like it was so powerful and spectacular, and I just wish that the second game had that level of polish to it. But I mean, the graphics are pretty good. Since then, I've kind of mellowed out as I started focusing on other parts of my life, but it's really fun to think back to a simpler time when video games were just crazy and everything they did felt like rocket science. The big thing right now is SSDs and ray tracing or whatever, but I don't know, I guess that's pretty cool. I don't know, but now I'm going to defer to the youngsters in the comments, so you guys tell me, what games blew your minds, because I really want to know.